They called her nothing worth remembering. A collection of insults whispered and shouted through hallways and locker rooms. A girl who learned early that silence was safer than speaking and looking down was easier than meeting eyes. So when the new private training facility opened on the edge of town with its high fences and warning signs and the rumor that it housed retired K-9s too aggressive for service, no one noticed how her steps slowed whenever she passed it on the bus ride home, how her fingers tightened on her bag as if counting something unseen. Because bullies never study their targets, they only see reflections of their own hunger. And hunger was what drove them that afternoon when the ringleader with the perfect smile and the followers who orbited him like moons decided that fear would be entertainment, that humiliation would be proof of their control, and they dragged her off the path during a fake apology, laughing as they shoved her toward the pen where the dogs paced thin and restless, ribs showing under scars earned in jobs that no one wanted to remember. And someone spat the words that would echo later like a curse. Get ripped apart. B*TCH. As the gate clanged shut and the pack surged forward. A blur of teeth and sound and heat. Except the first twist came before any scream because the dogs stopped short. Skidding in dirt. Ears lifting. Nostrils flaring. Recognizing a scent buried beneath soap and school dust. A command older than the hunger gnawing their bellies. And the girl stood very still, breathing slow, fingers open at her sides, her voice low and steady as she spoke names that were not names but promises, syllables learned not from books but from years spent after school in this very place when it had been something else, when it belonged to a shell company that belonged to another company that belonged to a trust. When she had watched men twice her size flinch at the snap of her fingers because authority, real authority, never needs to shout, and as the dogs sat, confused but obedient, the bullies, laughter curdled into panic, fists rattling the fences they realized the world had tilted, that the pen wasn't a cage for her but a stage, and the second twist followed as floodlights snapped on and cameras whirred to life. Red dots blinking like patient eyes, because the facility was never private in the way they thought. It was monitored, recorded, insured, and very carefully documented, and the girl finally looked up, meeting their eyes one by one, and in that gaze there was not anger but something colder, a ledger being balanced, as she pressed a button on her phone and the outer gates slid shut with hydraulic calm, sealing the bullies inside the perimeter while alarms chirped softly, not loud enough to attract neighbors but loud enough to register compliance, and she explained, still quietly, that the dogs were trained to respond to her, that starvation was a myth spread by people who confused discipline with cruelty, that the animals were lean because they worked and worked because they were respected, and that every second of this little performance was being streamed to a secure server where timestamps mattered, because this place existed to test people as much as dogs, to see who would choose mercy when offered power and who would choose spectacle. And as they shouted and pleaded and threatened to call parents and lawyers, the third twist unfolded with the arrival of the facility manager, an older woman with steel gray hair and a badge clipped to her belt, who did not look surprised because she was not surprised, because this had been anticipated in risk assessments and contingency plans, and she nodded to the girl as to a superior, asking if she wanted to proceed to phase 2, and the girl hesitated, not out of fear but out of calculation, because this was the moment where the story could turn cruel if she allowed it, where revenge could become the very thing that had shaped her, and instead she chose something sharper. She chose consequence, instructing the manager to call local authorities and child services and the school board, to flag the footage and the previous reports that had been filed and ignored, to release the dogs to their runs and escort the bullies to a holding room with water and seats and a mirror that showed them exactly who they were without the chorus, And as sirens approached from a distance, the fourth twist surfaced like a truth long submerged, revealed in a phone call she took without stepping away, where a calm male voice addressed her by a name none of them had ever used, referencing assets, compliance, and a court hearing scheduled months ago, because she did not just work here, she owned it. Not in the flashy way that invites envy but in the layered way that protects power. Because after her mother died and her father disappeared into debts he never admitted, she learned that survival was about systems, not strength. And she built those systems piece by piece, apprenticing under trainers, studying law at night, investing a small inheritance with ruthless patience. And when the town cut funding for programs that protected the vulnerable, she bought the land they sold cheap and turned it into something that could not be ignored. And the fifth twist came later that night when the footage went public. Edited not to shame but to illuminate. Captions outlining policies violated. Timelines connecting incidents. Names redacted until due process demanded otherwise. And the comments flooded in not with bloodlust but with recognition. People seeing themselves in the quiet girl who refused to scream. And the bullies. Parents watched in horror as the narrative they told themselves collapsed. Because the girl did not sue immediately. She waited, allowing investigations to conclude, letting schools reform policies under pressure, letting counselors intervene where punishment alone would fail. And when the lawsuits came they were precise, targeting negligence rather than youth, because the point was never to destroy children but to dismantle the structures that taught them cruelty paid dividends. And the sixth twist was the hardest to swallow for those who wanted a simpler ending, because months later the girl stood in the same yard during an open house, dog sleek and playful now, explaining training techniques to visitors. And one of the former bullies approached with eyes down, hands shaking, offering an apology that did not ask forgiveness but acknowledged harm. And she accepted it without ceremony, because power that lasts knows when to close a chapter. And the final twist arrived quietly, as most truths do, when a reporter asked her if she ever felt tempted to let the dogs loose that day, to make the threat real, and she smiled. Just barely, and said that fear is loud and fades quickly, but understanding is silent and endures, that the worst thing she could have done to them would have been to become the monster they expected. And as the sun set behind the fences that no longer felt like cages, the town learned something it had missed for years, that ownership isn't about papers or locks or shouted orders. It's about knowing yourself so completely that when someone tries to throw you to the wolves, you realize you've been walking them home all along.